Welcome to EPG Pathshala program. Myself Meenal Katarnikar, Associate Professor from the Department of Philosophy, University of Mumbai. We are now going to discuss the epistemological context of Indian logic with special reference to Nyaya and Buddhism, which is the Logic 1 module number 3.22. This module will give us the basic idea of the concepts in Indian epistemological theories such as Jnana, Prama, Pramana, Pramata, Prameya, Pramanya, etc. So let us go to the session. Let us go to the discussion on Indian epistemology. As the students of philosophy, we know that epistemology is the core part of philosophy which deals with the concept of knowledge. So, what is knowledge? From where it arises? So, sources of knowledge, the criterion of truth and falsity of knowledge, and the criterion of validity. These are some basic issues which are discussed in epistemology. When we talk about knowledge, there are three components. One is the person who is grasping the object or the person who is cognizing. The other concept is the object of knowledge, the thing that is grasped by the person, and third concept is the interaction between the subject and object, that is the resulting knowledge. So there are three basic notions in epistemology: the subject or the knower, the object or the known, and the knowledge as the resulting cognition. What is the status of these concepts in Indian tradition? When we talk about knowledge in Indian tradition, we have to differentiate between two basic notions, Jnana and Prama. Jnana stands for cognition and Prama stands for knowledge. So the difference between cognition and knowledge is worth considering. Cognition would be any experience like true experience or memory or dream or illusion, where we don't particularly differentiate between true or false cognition. So any experience irrespective of truth and falsity is cognition. It is the broader concept of which knowledge is a small part. Knowledge means a true cognition. When we categorize all the experiences and we segregate them into true and false experiences, we get a small class of true experiences which are termed as knowledge. To be specific, or if we want to know more terms about this, cognition is equal to aesthesis in the Greek tradition and knowledge is equivalent to episteme in the Greek tradition. These are respectively known as Jnana and Prama in Indian tradition. In the context of Indian tradition, two main notions are very important. One is Jnana and the other is Prama. Jnana is equivalent to cognition in epistemology and Prama is knowledge. The distinction between two is the criterion of truth or the distinction between truth and falsity. The term cognition or Jnana is used in at least two senses. The first sense is the general sense where all the kind of cognition or all the kind of experience is taken into account irrespective of the question of truth and falsehood. In other words, all the experience or all the cognition before demarcating between true and false is termed as Jnana. The second sense of the term cognition is epistemological sense, where it is used to be designated only for a true cognition. This true cognition is termed as Prama in the Indian tradition. The distinction between Jnana and Prama or cognition and knowledge gives us some more ideas about the connection of knowledge to certainty, incorrigibility and infallibility. In other words, when there is discussion of knowledge, generally knowledge is taken to be some certain state of mind which is incorrigible and infallible. So knowledge is inseparable from these aspects, that is the general understanding about knowledge, and the epistemologists were mainly searching for how do we arrive at this certain or incorrigible or infallible state. In other words, they were searching for some criterion of validity where it would be easy to distinguish between certain from ambiguous, corrigible from incorrigible, and infallible from fallible. One of the central themes in the theories of knowledge was epistemic justification. When there is any knowledge claim, it is taken to be rooted in some or other kind of vindication. When a person claims to know something in the world, it is assumed that the person is making this claim on some strong grounds or on some valid grounds. If the claim of knowledge is justified, that claim sustains as the knowledge claim, and if the claim is not justified on any grounds, that claim is rectified. So epistemic justification is very central to any theory of knowledge. Earlier we talked about three main components of any theory of knowledge, that is the subject, the knower, second is the object or the known, and third is the knowledge or the cognition. Now we will talk about the knower and various dimensions of the knower. The Sanskrit term for knower is pramata. Ordinarily in Indian tradition, soul or Atman is regarded as the knower, but the schools which do not accept the notion of Atman in any sense, they may find it difficult to assert that Atman is the knower, and therefore there is need to talk about the knower in more objective sense. And in this context, we can talk about four dimensions of knower. These dimensions are biophysical dimension, psychological dimension, rational dimension, and spiritual dimension. What is the meaning of these dimensions? Biophysical dimension gives us the idea of the body or physical aspect of the knower, where we can connect to the cognition through sense perception. So sense organs are mainly the content of this biophysical dimension. In the psychological dimension, we can refer to the notion of mind, and we can relate it to the psychological phenomenon like memory or recognition. We all are familiar with the rational dimension, as the human person is defined to be a rational being. So rational dimension designates the concept of rationality or intellect in the human existence. And in addition to these three dimensions, there is spiritual dimension to the knower also, where we can refer to the phenomenon of intuition or something like extrasensory perception, which is also part of epistemological discussion. The advantage of these four dimensions is that with the idea of knower having these four aspects, one can explain varieties of knowledge such as perceptual knowledge, inferential knowledge, or verbal testimony, or even memory, which are discussed in the Indian tradition. And also the articulation of knower in this way will be acceptable to both the varieties of schools, Atmavadin as well as Anatmavadin. Now we discuss the concept of prameya or the object of knowledge. Earlier we had seen that the world or the notion of the external world can be conceived as the object of knowledge. But what is really the notion of external world or reality? Reality can be conceived as one or many or manifold. It can be conceived as empirical or transcendent or both. And with all these features, this reality can be regarded as the object of knowledge. That means we can have knowledge of one reality or many realities or many aspects of the reality. At the same time, we can know the empirical truth, empirical reality or the transcendent reality. Here also we can make sense of both the varieties of knowledge, empirical as well as transcendent. However, a very important question in the Indian tradition, or for that matter in any tradition dealing with epistemology, is whether reality is mind independent or whether it is constructed by the knower. And this decides the further development of epistemological theory. We can see that in Indian tradition there are two main paradigms. One is a realistic paradigm and the other is constructivist paradigm. So in realistic paradigm, it is assumed that reality is given as the independent object, while in the constructivist paradigm, it is assumed that reality is not totally given as the independent object, but it is partly given and partly constructed. Third notion is the notion of knowledge or prama, or variably pramana also. It is assumed that the interaction between the subject and the object results into the knowledge. The interaction decides whether the subject grasps the object correctly or not. If it is grasped correctly, it leads to the true cognition. If it is not grasped correctly, it leads to the false cognition, which is to be rectified, and the lead is to be taken to the correct cognition. So the successful construction of the subject or the successful obtainment of the subject leads to the knowledge. The term pramana is very important in the Indian context. There can be variations about the nature of pramata, the nature of prameya, but one thing is very sure, that pramana is been accepted by all the traditions in Indian philosophy. There may be varieties of senses of pramana, but any epistemological theory in the Indian tradition starts with enumerating the number of pramanas and the definition of pramana. Pramana is also used in two senses. First sense, or very primary sense of the pramana, is that it is known to be the instrument of true cognition. It is regarded as something which helps the person to arrive at true cognition. Another sense of the pramana, which is the epistemological sense, ascribes it the meaning that pramana is not the instrument, but it itself is the true cognition. Sometimes the word pramana is also used in the sense of origin or the source of cognition. The two senses of pramana are more systematically articulated in the four conceptions of pramana. One is very primary concept of pramana, which is articulated by the Nyaya Vaisheshika systems, where prama, that is knowledge, is known to be just the connection to the complex facts, and pramana is a special instrument that helps the person to get connected with those complex facts. Second idea of pramana is available in the Buddhist epistemology, where pramana is regarded as that cognition which is uncontradicted. Here there is no distinction between prama and pramana, but pramana itself is taken to be the uncontradicted cognition or otherwise knowledge, type of knowledge. Third concept is the concept found in Mimamsa tradition, where it is discussed in a very different dimension. Knowledge or pramana is known to be having newness as well as non-sublatedness. Knowledge is that cognition which presents to the knower the object which is not known before, and it is that cognition which will not be sublated by any other cognition. The fourth concept of pramana is given by the Jainas, where they define pramana as the illumination of both subject and object, and also as free from the contradiction. Knowledge must have the self-guarantee, so it is self-illumination. Knowledge must be, or pramana must be, illuminating the object, otherwise it is not pramana at all. So this is the illumination of the object, and it should be free from the obstruction like doubt or illusion or any other kind of error. So these are 4 varieties or 4 different concepts of pramana found in Indian tradition. In general theory, 6 pramanas are accepted, and these 6 pramanas are with different numbers corroborated in different systems of Indian philosophy. These 6 pramanas we will talk one by one. So first pramana is perception. It is known to be direct knowledge, and it is more correctly known as sense perception, but it may also include intuition, and in both the senses it is direct knowledge. Second pramana is anumana or inference. It is the knowledge of something with the help of its mark. As we know, it is knowledge of the fire on the basis of smoke. Smoke is known to be the mark of fire, essential mark of fire, and this is the knowledge which crosses the boundaries of sense perception. It is more logical or rational type of knowledge. Third type of pramana is shabda or verbal testimony. It is the knowledge through language. It can have 2 dimensions. In ordinary sense, it is the knowledge through language of any object, and in more specialized sense, it is the knowledge through the scriptures. So it has 2 varieties, ordinary word and the scriptural word. These 3 pramanas are known to be the major pramanas because they are taken to be irreducible or independent or distinct pramanas. The 3 pramanas that we are going to see now are the combinations of the earlier 2, or then they are known to be the minor pramanas. Out of them, first is upamana pramana, which is known as comparison or the knowledge based on similarity. In the module on upamana, we are going to discuss the nature of upamana in detail. So here we will not talk much about upamana. The next pramana is arthapatti, which means implication. In detail, it is known as that kind of cognition which is helpful in bridging the gap between 2 apparently contradictory facts. The schools like Purva Mimamsa or specially Prabhakara school of Mimamsakas has accepted this pramana. Last pramana is Anupalabdhi. It is the knowledge of non-existence. No doubt there are many types of non-existences articulated in Nyaya and Jaina schools, but the knowledge of non-existence is the main epistemic problem, and how do we know something is non-existent is articulated in the pramana called Anupalabdhi. Let us have this system-wise review of the pramanas. Let us go from 1 to 6. So Charvakas is the system which accepts only one pramana, and that is sense perception. They do not accept pramana of perception in the sense of intuition. They are very specific that perception means sense perception. As the history of Indian epistemology in general and Charvakas let us know, some sophisticated Charvakas also accept inference, which is grounded in sense perception, as additional pramana. But that is a matter of different module. So we will talk about it in different module. The systems that accept 2 pramanas are Buddhists and the Vaisheshikas. They accept Pratyaksha and Anumana. The Yoga system, the Sankhya system and the Jainas, they accept 3 pramanas, namely Pratyaksha, Anumana and Shabda. The Jaina logician Siddhasen Divakara has introduced into his text titled Nyayavatara the scheme of 3 pramanas which is suitable to the ordinary Indian discourse. Otherwise, the Jaina theory of knowledge has a different scheme of pramanas. So, according to general tradition, the pramanas that are accepted in Jaina tradition are 3 in number: Pratyaksha, Anumana and Shabda. The Nyaya system adds the fourth pramana to these three pramanas, and they add the pramana called upamana, and therefore the number of pramanas accepted by them is 4. The Prabhakara Mimamsakas add to it the fifth pramana, that is arthapatti, and the number of pramanas accepted by them is 5. The Kumarila Bhatta or the Bhatta school of Mimamsakas add the sixth one, that is Anupalabdhi, and therefore the number of pramanas accepted by them is 6. The Vedantins also go with the Mimamsakas and they accept six pramanas. The number of pramanas and the variation between the number of pramanas accepted by the schools depends upon the priorities or a kind of logic accepted by the systems. Sometimes irreducibility is the criterion. Sometimes the distinctness of the pramanas or their matching to the metaphysical categories accepted by the system is the criterion. But there is no elaborate discussion in any particular system about why a particular number of pramanas is accepted in that system. As mentioned earlier, in the Jaina tradition, there is a different notion or there is different scheme of the pramanas. They don't go with the 6 pramanas which are mentioned as the general pramanas in the Indian tradition. They start with categorizing the pramanas into pratyaksha and paroksha. Pratyaksha is subdivided into empirical perception and transcendent perception. In the category of transcendent perception, they have 3 sub-varieties. One is clairvoyance, other is telepathy, and third is omniscience. In the category of paroksha pramanas, they have introduced the pramanas like memory, recognition and induction, which are not generally accepted in the Indian tradition as the distinct pramanas. These categories are accepted as the supportive conditions in the Indian systems but not as the distinct pramanas. Jainas have included them in the scheme of paroksha pramanas. In addition to these 3 pramanas, they also incorporate anumana and verbal testimony in the scheme of paroksha pramanas. But in the logic of Siddhasen Divakara, there is a proper synthesis between the traditional Jaina theory and the general Indian theory, and pratyaksha, anumana and shabda are given as the pramanas accepted by Jaina tradition. Authenticity of knowledge or pramanya is one of the issues that is being discussed by the Indian systems with a great rigor. According to Nyaya system, the authenticity of knowledge depends upon the object. So whether cognition is true or false does not depend upon whether the knower confirms the cognition, but it totally depends upon whether the object is grasped correctly or not. This is known as parataha pramanyavada in Indian tradition. To be more specific, validity or authenticity as well as invalidity or inauthenticity both depend upon the object, and Nyaya view is known as parataha pramanyavada as well as parataha apramanyavada. In the system of Mimamsa, they have different view about the pramanya. According to them, every cognition is true at the time of its origin because the knower is sure about the truth of the cognition. But the cognition is confirmed to be false only after the incorrect grasp of the object. So according to them, pramanya is swataha and apramanya is parataha. This is known as intrinsic validity of knowledge and extrinsic invalidity of knowledge. Buddhists have third view, and according to them, particularly according to Yogacara school of Buddhism, every cognition is invalid intrinsically. The momentary metaphysics of Buddhists does not allow them to entitle any cognition to be authentic or true, and therefore any cognition misgrasps the object at the time of its origin. So knowledge is intrinsically invalid, but only on the norm of arthakriya karitva, that means its utility in the ordinary sense, it proves to be correct. So, knowledge is proved to be valid only with the help of external objects. The Buddhist view is known as intrinsic invalidity and extrinsic validity of cognition. Now let us talk about the two paradigms that were mentioned earlier, the realistic paradigm and the constructivist paradigm. Nyaya Vaisheshika schools are holding the realistic paradigm of knowledge, where the triad of the subject, the object and the knowledge is accepted as it is given. In other words, the subject exists independently of the object exists independently of the subject, and the interaction between the subject and object gives rise to the knowledge. This is the realistic paradigm because the existence of every component of knowledge is accepted independently of each other. The constructivist paradigm is accepted by the Buddhists, according to which there is no clear acceptance of the triad of subject, object and knowledge. Whether object is existing independently or not cannot be confirmed by the subject, so the notion of object or the idea of the object is partly given in the world and partly it is constructed by the subject. So the notion of the object is not totally independent of the knowing mind or the subject's cognition. Cognition is the construction of the object on the part of the subject, and this kind of epistemological paradigm influences many other discussions in the epistemology which are coming in future. Buddhists are mainly the advocates of this constructivist paradigm. Let us go to know the differences between the realistic and the constructivist paradigm that we discussed just now. First difference comes in the prama and pramana relation. In the realistic paradigm, particularly the Nyaya system categorically differentiates between the knowledge and the instrument of knowledge. Instrument of knowledge is the process, and the result of that process is the product, that is prama, and therefore prama is different from the instrument. Prama is equal to the pramana phala. In the constructivist paradigm, the Buddhists do not accept the difference between prama and pramana. According to them, pramana is not the means or instrument of cognition, it is the type of knowledge itself. Second distinction is the relation between pramana and prameya. According to Buddhists, the pramanas which are accepted in their tradition, namely pratyaksha and anumana, have two specific objects to grasp. Pratyaksha grasps only the particular, and the inference or anumana grasps only the universal. There is no interchange between the object of knowledge and the pramana that grasps those objects. So there is one-to-one relation between the pramana and prameya. This theory is known as pramana vyavastha or pramana viplava. As against this, the Nyaya thinkers hold that the object of knowledge can be grasped by any of the four pramanas which are acceptable to their tradition. If the object cannot be grasped by one pramana, there is another pramana to give us knowledge of that object. This system is known as pramana samplava or pramana sankara. The main points that we should note about these paradigms is that the epistemological debates and the differences of opinion among various schools are closely connected with the metaphysical theories and concepts accepted by those particular schools. Realism, constructivism is the duo which is very central to the epistemological field in Indian tradition, I'll just say it in other words. Another important point which is to be noted is that in Indian tradition, we do not find the debates between empiricism and rationalism, which are otherwise known to be the epistemological debates. The main debate between the Indian epistemological systems is between realism and constructivism. So while studying Indian epistemology, this feature of the debates in Indian tradition must be remembered very importantly. What could be the reason that empiricism and rationalism are not the debating theories in Indian tradition? One very important reason is that the experience and the intellect are never regarded as excluding each other. This is reflected in the scheme of pramanas in the Indian tradition. Nyaya school accepts 4 pramanas where pratyaksha and anumana appear on the equal level. Same is the case in the Buddhist tradition, and we will see that pratyaksha is accepted in all the systems of Indian tradition, whether they are empiricist or rationalist. So meanings of the terms empiricist and rationalist in Indian traditions are not exclusive to each other, and in no sense experience and the reason are regarded to be anti or opposite to each other. To summarize, Indian traditions cannot be regarded or cannot be classified either as empiricist or as rationalist in any formal sense of the term. It would be helpful to differentiate between the realistic traditions and the constructivist traditions in the context of Indian epistemology. From the discussion that we had earlier, we can see that in the context of Indian epistemology, it would not be proper to regard the epistemological theories as giving importance to only formal logic. On one hand, Indian epistemology is related to logic, but on the other hand, it is closely connected to the streams like metaphysics, psychology, as well as philosophy of mind. So it is a very comprehensive picture of the sources of knowledge, the criterion of truth and falsity, and mainly the idea of the object, whether it is given or whether it is constructed. All the schools in Indian tradition are falling into these 2 broad categories of realism and constructivism, as we discussed earlier. The pramanas in the Indian tradition are very important field or important area which give us very comprehensive look of knowledge as elaborated by the Indian logicians. So when we study Indian epistemology, we should give proper attention to our notions of the subject, object, knowledge, pramanas, and the norms of validity. Please refer to the write-up that is available on this module, and also refer to the reference list that is mentioned at the end of this module. Thank you very much.